This is a full story. Puppy wishes you all a happy and enjoyable story. My boyfriend left me, who was suffering from unbearable stomach pain, on the side of the highway just to pick up his white moonlight, letting the cold rain slap my face randomly. Later, when I accepted someone else's ring, he pinned me against the wall, gritting his teeth and asking, "Are you really planning to leave me?" Hailey sat in the passenger seat, her face a bit pale. Today was the first day of her period, and her lower abdomen was writhing in pain. Rockey was driving and making a call, not noticing her discomfort. In her hazy consciousness, Hailey heard him say a few okays before hanging up. Rockey. She was just about to ask him to take her to the pharmacy for some painkillers. But the man interrupted her calmly. "Hailey, I need to pick someone up. You get out here first, and I'll have someone come for you later." Hailey closed her eyes, enduring the pain, and turned to him. "This is the highway, you want me to get out?" Rockey leaned over and kissed her forehead, his tone gentle but firm. "I have something urgent. You get out ahead. Peter is also on this highway. He'll be here in about 10 minutes. You can go back with him then." Looking at her boyfriend, Hailey noticed that, although his expression was as gentle as always, his left hand drumming on the steering wheel had sped up, unconsciously revealing his anxiety. She took a deep breath, softening her tone and pleading, "It's my period today, and my stomach really hurts. Besides, you can't just pull over on the highway, Rockey." She didn't want to argue with him at this moment, considering how intense the pain in her abdomen was. If she got out of the car, she might not even last the 10 minutes. Hailey thought this might make Rockey relent, but enough, stop overreacting. The tenderness in Rockey's eyes vanished instantly, clearly reaching the limit of his patience. Without even looking at her, he pulled the car over to the emergency lane. The atmosphere in the car became so suffocating that Hailey found it hard to breathe. She lowered her gaze and softly asked, "Are you going to pick up Serena?" After a while, he replied with an emotionless yes, completely disregarding her feelings. The hand Hailey had placed on her stomach clenched involuntarily, trembling until it turned white before she slowly let go. There was no point in dragging this on anymore. Begging only to be rejected was degrading. Before getting out of the car, the last thing she said to him was, "How ridiculous, my boyfriend is abandoning me on the highway to pick up another woman." 2 years ago, Hailey, as the representative of the second party, had to coordinate a flawed contract with the first party's company. On her way back, the heel of her high-heeled shoe suddenly got stuck in a drainage grate, twisting her ankle as she failed to pull it out. On a busy street with cars and pedestrians all around, she didn't want to take her shoes off in public. Just as Hailey was about to give in and remove her shoe, a pair of slender, strong hands gripped her ankle, twisting the heel and freeing the shoe. From Hailey's angle, she could only see the man's clean, sharp jawline. He released her ankle and stood up, smiling mischievously. A girl's feet should never touch the ground. The man had a devilish smile on his handsome face. The sun was blinding, and the air was suffocatingly hot. But suddenly, Hailey felt everything around her go quiet, so quiet that she could only hear the sound of her own heartbeat. In this fast-paced era of disposable love and self-interest, she fell for him at first sight. The next day, she saw him again in the conference room and learned that he was the project leader from the first party company, Rockey. Naturally, the two started dating, and occasionally he would whisper sweet nothings to her, or pick her up from work when he had time. The only odd thing was, Rockey never introduced her to his friends. When they ran into acquaintances on the street, he would only say her name in introductions. But Hailey didn't mind. She liked Rockey, and she didn't think those small details were worth worrying about. The first time Hailey heard Serena's name was on Christmas Eve last year. Rockey had finished work early and picked Hailey up. After a quick grocery run, they returned home. While Hailey was cleaning a carp in the kitchen, Rockey suddenly hugged her from behind, lightly biting her ear and chuckling. "Why are you so good at this?" Startled, Hailey froze, her face turning red from embarrassment. She bit her lip gently and turned to look at him, her shy gaze filled with anticipation. "Then why don't you marry me?" As soon as the words left her mouth, Hailey felt him stiffen for a moment, but he didn't say anything. The atmosphere grew cold, and just as she was about to change the subject, Rockey's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, then at Hailey, before stepping outside to answer the call. Maybe it was her intuition, but Hailey had a strange feeling that whoever was on the other end was important to Rockey. She quietly stepped out of the kitchen, standing by the wall in silence. She heard him speak in a voice gentler than she had ever heard before. "Why does your stomach hurt all of a sudden? Is it your period? Did you take any medicine?" A moment later, his speech quickened, and his tone was filled with concern and urgency. I'll come over now and take you to the hospital, okay, Serena? As he spoke, he went to grab his coat to leave. Turning around, he locked eyes with Hailey, who was still holding a spatula. He didn't move, nor did she. After what felt like forever, the rice cooker beeped, pulling Hailey out of her daze. The rice is ready. You're going out, right? Well, I'll wait for you to come back and eat. She tried to act nonchalant, but her voice came out stiff. Without another word, she quickly turned back. Hailey froze, not turning around. He looked at her back and, after a long pause, said in a low voice, she's just a friend. Later, Hailey realized that those words weren't just meant for her. They seemed more like a reminder to himself. It turned out that Rockey and Serena had been childhood sweethearts. It turned out he had loved Serena for 8 years. It turned out Serena had married someone else. She only learned all of this one night when Rockey was drunk and she saw his chat history with Serena. By that time, Hailey was already in love with Rockey down to her bones. So, she quietly set down his phone, went to the bathroom, and brought out a warm towel to wipe his face. Looking at his deep-set eyes, Hailey's eyes welled up with tears as she forced a smile, trying to console herself. It's okay, Serena is already married. He'll fall in love with me eventually. But the truth was, blind infatuation never ends well. In their 2 years together, all her compromises, her sacrifices, and her unconditional tolerance only moved herself. And all of that vanished the moment the news broke that Serena had divorced and returned home. The wind on the highway was strong, bringing bursts of cold, and with the sky growing darker, a sense of unease welled up in Hailey's heart. She had been waiting for nearly half an hour, but Peter was still nowhere to be seen. She stayed tightly against the railing at the edge of the highway, not daring to step forward. The cramping pain in her lower abdomen was draining what little energy she had left. She took out her phone, intending to call Rockey, but after tapping the screen a few times without response, she remembered the phone had long since died. The cars on the highway sped past like arrows, moving at extreme speed. All she could do was hope that one of them would notice her. But misfortune always seems to pile on at once. The overcast sky started to drop occasional raindrops, which soon grew into a heavy downpour. Hailey was soaked by the cold rain, and the pain in her abdomen intensified. She crouched by the railing, clutching her stomach with both hands, shivering all over. As it was getting dark, an off-road vehicle pulled up beside Hailey. A man, holding an umbrella, got out and crouched in front of her, offering the umbrella to shield her from the rain. "Why are you on the highway? Are you alone?" he asked. Hailey nodded weakly, struggling to speak. "Could you help me get off the highway or call the police?" Without saying much, Jack scooped up her frail body, half dragging, half carrying her into the passenger seat. He grabbed a blanket from the back seat and draped it over her, then immediately returned to the driver's seat and started the car. The warmth of the heater quickly spread, and soon Hailey felt sensation returning to her hands and feet. She gradually stopped trembling and softly muttered, "Thank you." Jack glanced at her pale face. "Should I take you to the hospital?" Hailey managed a faint smile, though she seemed to lack the strength. Shaking her head, her voice was hoarse. "No, just drop me off somewhere once we're off the highway." Jack snorted lightly, finding it absurd. "Do you think I'd leave someone who looks like they could pass out at any moment on the side of the road?" Hailey opened her mouth, but couldn't argue. Even if he dropped her off, she had no way to get home. Her phone was dead and probably waterlogged by now, and she didn't have a cent on her. Without giving her more time to hesitate, Jack said flatly, "Tell me your address." Hailey remained silent. Her home was the apartment she shared with Rockey, but she didn't want to go back there now. The downpour had chilled her to the bone. Jack glanced at her quiet expression and chuckled, still suspicious. Hailey quickly shook her head. No, it's not that. I'll trouble you then." She gave the address of a friend's apartment she had been watching over recently. Her friend had gone abroad for further studies, leaving the house empty, so they gave Hailey the keys, telling her she could stay there. The only fortunate thing was that she had the key in her bag, giving her somewhere to go when she had nowhere else. Hearing this, Jack raised an eyebrow but said nothing. As they passed by a pharmacy, Jack braked and pulled over, glancing at her before getting out. "Wait here for me." Hailey nodded, "Okay." Watching his tall, upright figure disappear, Hailey blinked in uncertainty. Was he really going to buy medicine for her? A few minutes later, Jack returned, tossing a bag to her. "What's this?" Hailey looked from the bag to him. "Cold medicine." Hailey pursed her lips. "Thanks, but I don't think I'm catching it." Before she could finish, her nose twitched and she sneezed. The irony hit her immediately. Jack glanced at her nonchalantly. Before starting the car again, Hailey hesitantly spoke up. Jack paused. "What now? Could you wait a moment? I need to buy some medicine." Jack frowned. "What else is wrong? What medicine do you need?" "I'll get it." Seeing him ready to leave again, Hailey quickly stopped him. No, I can do it myself." Jack looked at her for a few seconds, making Hailey feel uneasy. Then, with a slight nod towards her window, he said, "Did you see the downpour outside? If you go out and come back, I might as well drive you straight to the hospital." His sarcasm was obvious. The rain outside only got heavier, the sound of raindrops slapping against the car emphasizing the awkward silence inside. After a moment's hesitation, Hailey finally resigned herself and told him the names of 2 medicines. Jack repeated the names to confirm, then stepped out with his umbrella. The pharmacist chuckled when Jack returned for the 2 medicines. "Getting medicine for your girlfriend, huh? Don't let her touch cold water during her period." Jack paused briefly, nodded, and said nothing. Back in the car, Jack's expression remained neutral as he handed her the medicine. Neither spoke for the rest of the drive to her destination. "Which building and unit?" he asked, breaking the silence. Hailey thought for a moment. "Building 3, Unit 1. Jack chuckled again. She glanced over at him, confused. "Why did you pull in here?" Hailey asked, puzzled as they reached a parking lot. Jack turned off the car and stepped out, opening the passenger door and looking down at her with an amused expression. "I live here." Stunned, Hailey followed him out and into the elevator. She pressed the button for her floor, but the man next to her didn't move. Swallowing nervously, Hailey thought, "This can't be real, could it?" When the elevator stopped, they both got out. There were only 2 apartments on the floor. Hailey watched as he unlocked the door to the apartment next to hers. Before going inside, Jack turned to her and said, "Don't drink anything cold these next few days." His tone was casual, as if it was nothing. Meanwhile, Hailey's emotional walls, already on the verge of crumbling, completely collapsed. But her physical exhaustion soon overwhelmed her thoughts. After taking a shower and some medicine, she crawled into bed and quickly fell into a deep sleep. At the airport exit, after nearly an hour of waiting due to a flight delay, Serena finally appeared. She didn't look like someone who had ever been married, still as radiant and elegant as she was 3 years ago. "Rockey." The woman smiled with her red lips, her eyes full of charm. "Serena, long time no see." The man's voice was hoarse. Serena paused for a moment upon hearing the name, then smiled at him and said, "Why so distant?" Rockey gave a faint smile, with little emotion, as he took her suitcase. "Where do you want to go?" Serena touched her stomach, frowning slightly. "I'm so hungry." She pouted and acted spoiled, just like she used to, as if nothing had changed between them. Rockey was momentarily dazed, and his voice softened unintentionally. "Let me take you to eat first." Serena's eyes brightened. "I want seafood." In the car, Serena felt bored and turned on the radio. A formal female voice reported, "At 2:37 p.m. today, a section of the Jijin Expressway near Beiyang collapsed, suspected to be caused by heavy rain. The number of casualties is still being counted." Rockey tightened his grip on the steering wheel and immediately turned off the radio to call Peter. "Hello, Rockey, what's up? Where are you?" Peter sounded confused. "I just got home." Rocky's frown deepened and he asked in a low voice, "Didn't you see the message I sent you about picking up Hailey?" "Huh? What message?" Peter instantly woke up. "I didn't see it. I was driving and didn't check my phone." "Where's she now? Do I still need to go get her?" Rockey immediately hung up and tried calling Hailey. Her phone was off, and every attempt to call her led to the same result. Serena looked at the man beside her, noticing the trace of worry on his usually calm face. "What's wrong, Rockey?" Her clear voice made Rockey stop, and he let out a quiet sigh. "Nothing." After that, he didn't attempt to call again. This kind of unlikely event wouldn't happen. Hailey was just throwing a tantrum, refusing to talk to him. He told himself this. In the following days, he didn't take the initiative to contact her even once. Hailey continued to stay in the apartment and didn't go back. She deliberately avoided anything related to Rockey. She only went out for work, so she hadn't run into Jack again. The turning point came on a Saturday afternoon. That day was supposed to be a day off, but when Hailey's boss went to sign a contract, he realized he had forgotten it. He urgently called her, demanding she deliver it within half an hour. The situation was rushed, and after Hailey hurried to deliver the contract, she returned home, only to remember she had forgotten her keys. Standing in front of the dark, glossy wooden door, she was silent for a moment, then knocked on Jack's door, hoping for luck. A few seconds later, the door opened, and Jack appeared in casual clothes. Hailey felt a bit awkward. I forgot my keys and was hoping to use your balcony to get in. Is that okay?" Jack casually nodded and stepped aside to let her in. "Thanks," Hailey said, following him to the balcony. She took a quick glance around. His place was almost twice as large as hers, and though he appeared to live alone, the apartment was neat and simple yet stylish. Jack leaned lazily against the balcony railing, giving her a once-over. "You want to climb over?" "Yes," Hailey replied. "The 2 balconies are really close. It's not difficult." Jack smirked, scratching his eyebrow. Don't be so confident. This is the 15th floor. Not liking being underestimated, Hailey explained seriously. I used to climb trees all the time as a kid. Jack's mouth twitched, and without wasting any more time, he glanced at the balcony, then effortlessly vaulted over to the other side. Hailey stared in shock as he made the leap in one smooth motion. You're still standing there? The door's open, Jack said, already back from her apartment. Hailey swallowed and, with genuine admiration, said, You're amazing. Jack raised an eyebrow. Overrated. Later, while on her way home from work, Hailey ran into Jack again and hitched a ride. Slowly, they started to interact more. She learned that he was a retired Special Forces soldier, now working as a trainer for the military. As it happened, his unit was in the same direction as her workplace, and Jack casually offered to drive her to work. If time permitted, they could also return together after work. Hailey made a show of politely declining before quickly agreeing, promising to treat him to dinner as thanks. Jack didn't seem to mind either way. When Rocky's call came, Hailey was momentarily thrown off. Half a month had passed without any contact between them, and she hadn't thought of him either. Some things needed to be addressed. She paused and then answered, Hailey? His usually sultry, magnetic voice was now cold and stern. You've been out messing around? Not even coming home? The accusatory tone was unmistakable. Her mind immediately snapped back to reality, and for a brief moment, she had clung to some vague hope when she first heard his familiar voice. She cursed herself inwardly for being foolish and then found his words amusing. I thought you brought Serena back. I didn't want to stay in your way. At the mention of Serena, Rockey recalled the incident on the highway, and his tone softened. Serena and I are just friends now. Leaving you on the highway was a misunderstanding. Hearing no response, he continued to explain, I sent Peter a message, but he didn't see it. It was ridiculous. He could have just called Peter, but instead, he sent a message and then forgot about it, which clearly showed how little the matter had concerned him. Hailey lowered her gaze to the bed, where the gentle, bright moonlight spilled over the sheets, and suddenly remembered how, long ago, Rockey had left her alone on Christmas Eve when Serena wasn't feeling well. The moon that night was much like tonight's, and she had waited on the sofa all night, but he never returned. Love and indifference were easy to see from the beginning. In fact, her one-sided persistence had long since lost its meaning. It wasn't entirely Rocky's fault. Knowing he loved someone else, she was the one who refused to let go. She was reaping what she had sown. Hailey? Rockey called her again when she didn't respond for a long time, glancing at the screen. The breeze slipping in through the window brought her back to her senses. Looking at the potted plants in the corner, she thought they looked beautiful, but since they didn't get enough sunlight, the edges of the leaves had already begun to turn yellow. No matter how beautiful something is, if it doesn't belong, it's no use. So she said, let's end this, Rockey. There was sudden silence on the other end, as if even his breathing had stopped for a moment. A few seconds later, he asked slowly, You want to break up with me? His voice sounded like he was holding something back. Hailey didn't respond, which was answer enough. Rockey, now furious, let out a bitter laugh. You've known about me and Serena for so long. Why hold on this long and suddenly give up now? The sharp pain in Hailey's heart brought her clarity. You see, he watched you sacrifice everything to love him, fully aware of your feelings, yet he treated your devotion with such disregard. Rockey instantly regretted his words. He rubbed his temples, his tone softening. Hailey, listen to me. But Hailey cut him off, holding back tears as her voice broke with emotion. You're right. I should have known better, but can't I stop now? Her voice softened, barely more than a whisper, tinged with a sob she couldn't quite suppress. Rockey, I've never done anything to wrong you. Did you have to treat me so carelessly? Rockey felt a sudden wave of panic, as if something was slipping from his grasp, like a kite with its string cut, never to return. But before he could say anything more, Hailey had already hung up. After ending the call, Hailey opened his WeChat and sent him a message. I'll come back Friday at 5 p.m. to collect my things. I hope you won't be there. She then swiftly blocked him. Wrapping herself tightly in the blanket, Hailey told herself, if you keep thinking about that jerk, you're a fool. In the 2 years she had been with Rockey, she had never shown any weakness. Even when she first learned about Serena, although she had been on the verge of tears, she had forced herself to act as though nothing had happened. This was the first time she had ever felt so heartbroken. Rockey leaned back on the sofa, closing his eyes, his heart aching like it was suffocating. He exhaled heavily and thought, she's serious. And her seriousness terrified him. Friday morning, Jack was routinely waiting for her in the parking lot. A few minutes later, Hailey got out of the elevator and into the car. She closed the door and handed the box in her hand to him. Jack took it. What is this? I made sandwiches this morning, made an extra one for you. The man raised his eyebrows slightly, thanks. The sandwiches didn't have much of a smell, and the two finished eating them in the car before driving off. On the road, Hailey suddenly remembered something and turned to him. You don't need to wait for me tonight, I'm going to look for an apartment. She wasn't exactly lying. Staying at a friend's house for too long wasn't ideal. Jack paused for a moment, but his face showed nothing. You're moving out? Hailey nodded. This is my friend's place. I'm just staying temporarily. Jack didn't say anything more. When they reached her company's entrance, he finally spoke. Tell me what kind of apartment you're looking for. I'll help keep an eye out. The man tapped the steering wheel with one hand, his tone casual. Hailey smiled slightly. Thank you, I don't have many requirements. Just not too expensive and clean. Would you consider a shared apartment? She thought for a moment. That's fine, as long as the roommate is clean and not too noisy. Jack nodded slowly, his tone unclear. All right then. Hailey suddenly had a bad feeling. That afternoon, Hailey finished work early and left the company around 4:30, carrying her bag. When she got to her old apartment, she opened the door. Unexpected but not surprising, Rockey was sitting on the couch waiting for her. Hailey ignored him, heading straight to her room to pack. Still causing trouble. Hailey, have I been too indulgent with you? He stood up and grabbed her wrist. Hailey suddenly remembered that the day he left her by the road, he also accused her of making a scene. She had probably let go by now. When she heard these words, the sadness was faint. More annoyance and amusement. Heartbreak felt like a long time ago. She pulled her hand free, packed her things, lifted her suitcase, and turned to him, curving her lips in a smile devoid of emotion. You're right, I've been dramatic. But now I'm leaving, so you won't have to deal with it anymore. Could you move aside? The woman in front of him was still beautiful, but there was no love left in her eyes. Rockey pursed his lips, his gaze dark and cold, blocking her way without moving. She didn't have the patience to wait, so she squeezed past him. As she reached the entrance, his voice came from behind her. I'll say this one last time, if you leave now, don't come back. The last bit of heaviness in her heart lifted, and Hailey let out a laugh. I wouldn't want to. She tossed the key onto the shoe cabinet and walked out, looking completely carefree. Rockey stared heavily at the keys on the cabinet, suppressing the discomfort and panic rising within him. He told himself she would come back to him. She loved him so much. How could she just leave like that? Hailey was still fuming when she got home, then remembered she had forgotten to look for apartments. With a sigh of frustration, she thought, Rockey wasted my time. Glancing at the clock, it was nearly 8 p.m. Hailey decided to look for apartments tomorrow. The unpleasantness Rockey had brought her lingered. She wasn't in the mood to cook, so she grabbed a cup of instant noodles, poured in hot water, and let it steep. Just as she was about to eat, there was a knock at the door. Hailey opened it to find Jack standing there. Do you need something? Hailey poked her head out to look at him. Jack raised his eyebrows, glancing at her, half hidden behind the door. Can't I come in? Hailey opened the door. Of course, come on in. He glanced at the lone cup of instant noodles on the table, frowning slightly. That's your dinner? Hailey awkwardly hummed and casually replied, I'm not very hungry tonight. Then quickly changed the subject. What did you need me for? Did you find an apartment? Jack asked. Hailey shook her head, her gaze dropping. The mention of apartments brought Rockey back to mind. Jack looked at the lively girl in front of him, thinking of how, 2 weeks ago, when he found her in the rain, she was entirely different. Back then, she was like a wet, injured baby bird, pitifully huddled on the ground, unable to fly. Though she tried to act calm and composed, she couldn't hide her vulnerability, which made her seem adorable. Do you want to share an apartment with me? The sudden words shattered the silence in the air. Hailey, who had been swinging her feet in her slippers, froze. She quickly looked up at him, blinking in surprise. What did you say? Don't want to? Hailey instinctively denied it. No, it's not that. She couldn't quite figure out why, but her mind was a little jumbled. Jack slowly listed the advantages of living with him. My rent is low, I keep things clean, I don't talk much. And the best part, you'll get a ride to and from work. She couldn't argue with that. After a moment of silence, Hailey quietly voiced her doubt. You seem to live fine on your own. Why would you want to share a place with me? You don't seem like you're short on money. Jack pulled his gaze from the cold cup of noodles, looking at her calmly. What do you want me to say? The man's sharp features and his military crew cut gave off an air of authority, even though he was wearing casual clothes. Under his straightforward gaze, Hailey felt a bit uneasy, only managing an awkward laugh to brush it off. Nothing. Jack saw her discomfort but still leaned in closer. Hailey's heart raced with panic, but she tried to stay composed, her eyes darting nervously, not daring to meet his gaze. Do you want me to say I like you? That I don't want you to leave, so I'm offering to share a place? Jack's hands were in the pockets of his sweatpants as he leaned closer. Pinning her against the wall, his eyes locked onto hers. Her face was already flushed, though it was more from embarrassment than shyness. Hailey took a deep breath, her face still red, but she answered him seriously. Sorry, I just got out of a relationship, and I don't think I'm ready to date yet. Jack chuckled softly. Though she was rejecting him, she looked adorably flustered. He straightened up and backed off, giving her space, not wanting to scare her. All right then, how about giving me a chance? If you move out, how can I prove myself? With such good living conditions, only a fool would say no. And besides, she should start seeing other people. For 2 years, she had turned down plenty of others for Rockey. Seeing her hesitate for a moment before nodding, Jack's clenched hand in his pocket finally relaxed. Then, he pointed at the cup of noodles. That's cold by now. I just made dinner. Want to join me? Hailey shook her head. No need, I'll just make another one. She didn't want to eat at his place right after turning him down. Jack didn't press the matter further. Pushing too hard would backfire. He simply brought a few dishes over from his place, then left her to eat on her own. That day was the first time Hailey had ever seen Rockey look so panicked. Before getting off work, Jack had texted her, saying he could make it in time to pick her up and asked her to wait. Hailey, intending to tease him, only replied with an "oh," unlike her usual playful response with emojis. A few minutes later, Jack texted back, "It won't be long." He clearly thought she was upset, and Hailey chuckled mischievously. Since Jack confessed his feelings, he had earnestly and patiently pursued her for 3 months. He had found her during the last rain of autumn, and now, the coldest days were almost over. Even though they lived under the same roof, Jack had never overstepped any boundaries. He always respected her and kept a proper distance. He was genuinely courting her. 3 months wasn't long or short, and Hailey might still not be able to fully fall in love with Jack. But she had completely let go of Rockey. Her company had ongoing collaborations with Rockey's, and 2 months ago, when she went there for a handover, she happened to see Rockey and Serena step out of the elevator together. She stood far away, and neither of them noticed her. She overheard people around her discussing how well Rockey and Serena matched. It didn't stir much in her, and she even agreed with their comments. A few seconds later, she went back to flipping through the contract in her hand, not sparing them another thought. In less than 10 minutes, Jack arrived. After receiving his call, Hailey leisurely made her way downstairs. The tall, lean man leaned against the car door, quietly watching her. The cold wind lifted the hem of his coat, and for a brief moment, she felt a flutter in her heart. Hailey quickened her pace, walked up to him, looked up, and smiled. "Let's go." Jack nodded, just as Hailey turned around. Her arm was suddenly yanked back forcefully. She turned to see Rockey staring at her darkly, his voice chilling. "Hailey, it's only been a little while, and you're already with someone else?" He cast a glance at the man beside her. The hostility in his eyes was unmistakable. Hailey had blocked all contact with Rockey. At the time, her company had also run into issues, and he had to prioritize work. Later, Serena approached him, and during that time, he genuinely tried to move on from Hailey, to accept someone else. Serena, his childhood friend, was still there, but his feelings had changed. Serena would hold his hand, hug him every day, just like Hailey used to cling to him. When she cooked in the kitchen, her silhouette was so similar to Hailey's. That day, as if possessed by some force, he let Serena stay. Night fell, and between grown men and women, no more words were needed. Serena lay shyly beneath him, beautiful and alluring. He kissed her, like he was kissing a long-coveted treasure. But just as he was about to lose control, he suddenly rolled off and lay to the side. He covered his eyes with his arm and said, "Serena, I can't forget her." Even though he kept telling himself repeatedly, he still loved Serena, that Hailey wasn't that important. But he had to admit, life without Hailey felt empty, like he was a walking corpse. He finally acknowledged that he had fallen in love with Hailey long ago. This time, he was willing to lower his head, to swallow his pride, as long as Hailey could forgive him. On his way to find her, he had even spotted a flower shop, remembered she liked white camellias, and got out to buy her a bouquet. But now, the flowers couldn't be given. Rockey's heart felt like it was being pricked by countless needles, painful and suffocating. How heartless she was, laughing and talking with another man as if nothing had happened. Only a few months after they broke up, Jack glanced down at the hand gripping Hailey's arm. Then he raised his hand and swatted it away, locking eyes with the man before him. Unyielding, "Buddy, if you have something to say, say it. Why are you grabbing her?" Rockey was instantly enraged, his aura full of malice. "I'm talking to her, not you." Hailey, upon seeing Rockey, had initial surprise in her eyes, but that soon faded into indifference. She stood in front of Jack, calmly looking at Rockey, wondering how she ever fell for him. "Do you still not understand why I broke up with you?" she interrupted him. Rockey stared at her with bloodshot eyes. The sudden drop in temperature made her words feel even colder. "Because even after I told you I wasn't feeling well, you still left me by the highway. Because you were indecisive, yet stayed with me. Because you've always loved someone else, Rockey." Tears welled up in Rockey's eyes. He trembled as he reached out, his voice hoarse. "I was wrong, Hailey. Can you forgive me just this once?" Hailey sidestepped slightly to avoid him. Did he ever panic like this because of her? But she no longer cared. "Rockey, I'm not here to settle old scores with you, but you don't know." She recalled something and chuckled lightly, as if mocking her own foolishness. "That day, I don't even know how long I stood in the rain. I wanted to call you, to tell you I was really in pain, but my phone had died. I had no choice but to squat by the roadside alone." Her voice was so calm, as if telling someone else's story, as though she had never gone through it herself. "Over those 2 years, I forgave you many times." That encounter ended with Rockey leaving in despair. After he left, Hailey decisively got into the car, the rearview mirror reflecting his retreating figure, but not once did she look back. 2 months passed, and the biting autumn winds and winter snow gave way to warmth. One night in late March, Hailey developed acute gastroenteritis due to long hours at work, shift changes, and irregular sleep. It sounded like a common inflammation, but the pain was excruciating. Jack noticed her unusual state and immediately rushed her to the hospital for an IV drip. In the early hours of the morning, Hailey woke up to see the man sitting in a chair beside her, dozing off in his shirt. He had draped his coat over her to keep her warm. Jack opened his eyes and, seeing her awake, knelt in front of her, his voice still hoarse. "Does it still hurt?" He glanced at the IV bag and sighed with relief. There was still more medicine to go. Hailey looked down at him, her nose suddenly tingling with emotion. She gently lifted her hand and rubbed his earlobe, asking, "Will you be my boyfriend? I'm sorry I didn't fall for you at first sight, but thank you for accompanying me over the past 6 months, helping me quickly move on from my last relationship. Because I saw the sincere love and care in your eyes, I've once again come to believe that I have the right to be loved." That year, in the blossoming spring, Hailey finally met someone who loved her wholeheartedly and responded to her every need. 3 months into their relationship, one night while they were out shopping, Jack pulled her into a jewelry store and stopped in front of a display case filled with rings. Hailey, feeling a bit flustered, tugged at his hand. "Isn't this too fast?" Jack raised an eyebrow and chuckled softly. "What are you thinking?" He was just buying a pair of simple rings to declare his boyfriend's territory. Then he squinted his eyes slightly, looking at her with amusement. "Did you think it was an engagement ring?" Caught red-handed, Hailey refused to admit it, even becoming a bit flustered. "I did not." Later, when Hailey grew tired, Jack went to buy her some milk tea. She lifted her hand to admire the ring, her lips curving into a smile. Though it was just a simple band, she couldn't help but love it. Suddenly, she was pushed into a corner. Frowning, she looked up. It had been almost 6 months since she last saw Rockey. He hadn't bothered her since their last encounter. Rockey's gaze was fixed on the ring on her hand, his tone bitter. "Are you really going to leave me?" At that moment, he truly felt the weight of her departure. She had fallen for someone else. His heart felt torn apart, but only Hailey could heal him. "I've already ended things with Serena. It's just you and me now. Let's get married, Hailey. Don't leave me." There was no trace of his former arrogance, only the most humble plea, but it didn't shake Hailey in the slightest. She slowly pushed Rockey's hand away, her voice calm. "You were the one who left me first. The day you abandoned me. You made your choice. Rockey, you were the one who let me go first." Rockey froze, unable to raise his hand to stop her again. Hailey didn't linger, walking around him and leaving. Rockey slightly tilted his head to watch her retreating figure. She hadn't changed at all. The ring on her hand caught the light from the street lamp, sending a dazzling reflection into his eyes. Rockey suddenly remembered a day during their 2 years together. He had paused in front of a jewelry store. A couple was at the counter picking out rings, the man doting, the woman adorable. At that moment, Hailey's image flashed in his mind, and he found himself walking toward the counter as if possessed. Just as he was about to inquire about a pair of rings he liked, Serena called to tell him she was getting a divorce. That day, he left the jewelry store without looking back. Bonus scene. Hailey bit on her milk tea straw, sneaking glances at the man driving. When she came back earlier, Jack had already returned and was standing in place, waiting for her. She had been about to explain the situation, but he had only placed the milk tea in her hand and headed to the parking lot to get the car. Hailey took another sip of her milk tea and deliberately tried to strike up a conversation. I clearly asked for hot milk tea, but this is just warm. She shook the milk tea in her hand toward him. Jack didn't even spare a glance, just replied indifferently. Really? Yeah. Don't believe me? Try it. She held the cup out toward him. Jack turned his head to avoid it. I believe you. Watching him dodge, Hailey puffed her cheeks and glared at him. Why are you avoiding it? Are you disgusted by me? Jack curled his lips but didn't respond. The two remained silent until they reached the elevator in their complex. The more Hailey thought about it, the more upset she became. He was always the one clinging to her, kissing her endlessly. Now he was avoiding her. She opened the door and headed straight for her room, not even looking at him. But before she could turn on the light, she was picked up and placed on the hallway cabinet. What followed was Jack's rough, intense kiss. The quiet air made the sound of their swallowing all the more suggestive. And soon, Hailey was swept away in a tide of desire. Sensing her struggle for breath, Jack slowed down, kissing her gently, as if to soothe her. Disgusted by you? His deep, magnetic voice echoed. Then why didn't you drink my milk tea? Hailey sniffled, feeling a bit pathetic. She had actually been kissed to the point of tears. Then why are you still in contact with Rockey? Hailey froze. She cupped his face from where he nestled against her neck and looked at him. You saw that? Why didn't you ask me? Jack raised an eyebrow. What should I ask? What if you said you were getting back together with him? How could that be? I only like you. Hailey blurted out. After a moment, Jack chuckled softly, pleased by her immediate reaction. Later, when Hailey was in the shower, the bathroom door suddenly opened. She spun around. Jack leaned against the door frame, twirling the key in his hand, his smile wicked. Wah, what are you doing? Hailey instinctively tried to cover herself with her hands, but quickly realized it was futile. Showering with you. My shower head's broken, he said, stepping closer. Didn't you say I was disgusted by you? I'll prove otherwise. The next day, Hailey didn't wake up until noon, and Jack was nowhere to be found. Her whole body ached like she'd been run over multiple times. Slowly, she climbed out of bed, supporting her waist, thinking she'd take a shower. But as she recalled what had happened in the bathroom last night, she found it hard to look at the space directly. So, she gathered her clothes and went to Jack's bathroom instead. Turning on the shower, she suddenly remembered Jack saying last night that his shower head was broken. Her thoughts were interrupted by the steady stream of water spraying from the perfectly working shower head. Jack, you're dead. The end. If you like Puppy's story, please follow and like it. Updated every morning at 9 a.m.